So you're teaching eighth graders these days. What do you guys do? I remember my eighth grade teacher. I don't know if she's still in the system. She's probably long since retired, but when I went to Jepson. And are you five classes? Is it all eighth grade? Is it seventh and eighth? Do you shake it up? Six?
I have six classes this year. Yeah, it's called 100. They call it six fifths, like a dub name, but really it's 120%. And
Ching.
it's a lot. I don't have a break. I have like 25-minute lunch, where I'm like kind of like a zombie. No, you know what I was thinking the other day? Because the honors class is always packed. I mean, it's so unfair. There's like 35 kids in the honors class. Last year I had 36. That's just wait. It's like that should be two classes, right?
Especially
I
if it's an honors class. Like that's sort of the point.
Exactly. And I told it up. I have way more students than any of my other colleagues, plus the huge honors class. I tell the parents at back to school night that, the kids really are at a disservice. I can't help them the way that they should be. But the kids were telling, they had a good observation before I went on break, like about how I'm such an unusual English teacher or teacher generally. And I realized I think I still teach like I'm teaching college. Really, we have great discussions. That's really a lot of class because I do feel like in English, most of your work it has to be, it's you and that reading or you and that paper you're writing, and I can't do it for you. I can certainly coach you. I can, and I could help you edit your papers and I can help you with your ideas. But really, I don't think my teaching has changed that much. And I'm always a rebel. I don't do anything that the other classes are doing.
That's probably why you're a good teacher. I mean, I kind of remember that too. I was in the district briefly under an emergency credential, and they finally got a replacement, and the kids were all bummed. They're like, "You come and inspire us, and now you're going to go." But it's like because I'm doing the college thing, I'm not doing high school or junior high, and I don't know if it's the way that they're trained in their credentialing programs, or if they're doing education in undergrad. There is a trajectory, and like they produce a certain type, but in the end, you want to make a thinker, right? You want to make someone who's autonomous.
Exactly. It's the goal. Even when I already been teaching for 3 years by the time I went to teaching school, which is another redundancy. Like, why do I really have to go get a year-long credential after I've already been I'm pretty 3 years, you're good to go. There was just another dumb thing, but the standards had changed from California standards, which were really rote. To look at them, it was like, okay, ninth grade students will learn onomatopoeia. Like, I'm not joking. That was like one of the, like, you can't teach in eighth grade, don't teach it in 10th, only in ninth. It was so ridiculous. Then of course they had those stupid bubble tests, and not that tests are much better, but and then the Common Core standards were much more, like more critical thinking based, like really more loose. Essentially what you would do in English class.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember that outrage, like Common Core, like there's just whatever new thing is in public education, people get to have an uproar. But I realized very early, there's really just any trend that comes, you can just wait it out. You can just like, all right, give it a few years and people forget.
Yeah. And the other side of that too, not to cut you off, but I think it's the problem is the classroom setting, right? Like where you've got 35, in your large classes. Ideally, you want somewhere around 20 something, 20 to 25 would be the most effective. But okay, you're in a classroom, and you know what? Like some students don't jive well with your cookie cutter molds. And so like the problem I see with Common Core is just the word common. And I think that it's like a lot of these techniques are very effective with a lot of students, and other techniques are effective with other students. And you got to kind of empower a teacher to discern, right? Like these are my kids. When they leave, they're going to leave having been my student. And so how can I make the most impact with them? And sometimes, like Common Core stuff is really good. Sometimes other techniques are really effective too. And here I don't know, No Child Left Behind wasn't so much about technique as far as I know. Was it? Or I think maybe it was before your time, but that was kind of like.
I missed that. I think I was lucky. I graduated right before that.
Oh, okay.
So I skipped. I think a lot of teachers left the profession then. I think there was an exodus.
Yeah, I think it had more to do with like teacher qualifications and things as well, right?
Yeah,
And
like I think too they were tying like test scores to like teacher. Well, I think depends on the state, but they were trying to tie like, you know, student performance to school funding and teacher, you know, things that are like, if you think of, you know, you think about it for a little bit, it's like, well, there's so many factors that go into any class.
yeah,
Kind of ridiculous. I swear, you could tell me if I'm wrong, but I want to say
you're
that
wrong.
Left Behind had some goal like, you know, like that's like not even not even possible. Like 100% of students will be at reading level by 2010 or something ridiculous, like almost that, you know. And then it's like, oh well, new president, new thing, goodbye.
Yeah, right, exactly. Well, I don't know. I have a lot to. We may have a second podcast just on education, the education system. You know, it's just a different equation, and the teachers they're the ones who are getting tested. So you know, they're prepping students to score on tests, not to learn. You know, and that's not universal, but it's.
Yeah.
Yeah, the problem is when anything's institutionalized, right? And then you look for measurables on that. Okay, well, you know, what are we? This is what the numbers show, but the numbers don't show kids. They don't show their moms and dads, or if they have moms and dads, or if they're stable in their employment, or if they're addicted to, you know, drugs or they're alcoholics. And, you know, it's just, there's so many things that go into where a child is, you know, and even college undergrad is this way too, like where they are when they show up in your classroom. And that's that's where a good teacher is gifted to really take it as a divine calling, right? Like, I mean, teaching is one of the, you know, it's one of the, what would we call it? One of the attributes of God. You know, if I can take it there, I'm not being preachy, but like,
yeah, no, I know. It's sort of beautiful, capital B, yeah.
Yeah, you have to be there, and like you have to really take this person's human life development into your arms for an hour. You know what I mean? Like maybe it's an hour a week, maybe it's 5 hours a week, you know, who knows? And then all of a sudden they're gone. And it's like, oh, do you remember me? Of course I remember you.
Oh, that's the hardest part.
Yeah.
Partying with the kids. I always remember something my dad told me, and he had a very rough youth, you know, very sensitive boy, pretty neglected. And he told me when I was early in my secondary teaching years, he's like, you have to remember that, you know, anything you could say something, you know, small to you, but it could have really lasting, you know, impact. Like the positive or negative things you say can really, you know, make or break the way a kid looks themselves. And it was so simple the way he said it, you know, and almost kind of like he said it as a passing remark, but it like really hit me. So I always try to keep that in my mind. I always try to replay that, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's why I teach. I really love the kids, you know. I don't think I don't have any great pedagogical technique, but I just really enjoy being with them and like discovering their talents. And my husband Jay volunteers a lot with the students. He's paying one of my honor students, serious boy, to write an article for his publication, because he wrote this incredible analysis of Zelda, you know, of all the games. And
yeah.
It was professional. Jay's like, this is 80% professional level. Like, so funny how Jay gave it a measurement.
I love it. That's great. It's an encouragement too, right? The kid out of nowhere, he's putting together something, and all of a sudden, you know, you're getting it measured, you know.
And we put work, you know. Yeah. And then he's like, I don't want to get paid. And Jay's like, no, writers get paid for their writing, so you're getting beautiful. Paid. Yeah. I'm gonna cry. Are you the kind of dad who can do stuff like I hate like amusement parks. I'm such a curmudgeon, man. I just can't. I try to, you know, put on a good face, but I'm one of them parents. I'm like, we can go camping, we can go on a road trip, we can go for a walk, but man, I hate some of the corny kid stuff. Disneyland's okay. I'm glad that I got to go to Disneyland when I was a kid a couple times and see, because Disneyland was pretty much original still.
Yeah, right.
You know, it was almost a little run down when I was going, and I kind of like that.
Yeah, nothing else to compare. You mentioned your dad. and his advice. But is that your Cherokee side of the family?
Yes.
Okay. Like, so tell me about your heritage a little bit, because you're not just, a lot of people are like, oh yeah, I'm Cherokee.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, there's certain tribes that have really filtered into, the American gene pool, so clearly. But then there's people,
Or at least the like American consciousness, like I always find that people will say, and it's always these two tribes, though, or I would say maybe two or three tribes. But Cherokee, Blackfoot, and Navajo tend to be the ones that people say. And the really weird mix I'll get is like, oh, I'm Cherokee and Blackfoot, and I'm like, these are two really different geographical regions. But I don't know why these certain tribe names. I know why Cherokees are pretty famous, pretty well known tribe. Since the beginning, but but the other, I don't know, the other like Plains Dakota tribe seems so remote, but people seem to know that.
yeah.
I don't know. So it's so I would never even tell people really, that I'm a Cherokee tribal member and my family are pretty, important in development of Cherokee Nation, just because it sounds so made up. I would be sort of embarrassed. I wouldn't want to tell people. They would think I was like, just, like, oh, like, if we have it, like my great grandmother was, a Cherokee princess or something.
Yeah. Well, there's a difference between like having heritage, and then actually being in the nation, being a member of the nation. And the word nation, I think, for a lot of folks, I mean, most people probably just associate it with the country of your citizenship, not necessarily thinking of it as, this is an organization of community, and it has legal standing, right? Like, what's that like, just being part of a nation within a nation, right?
Yes, yeah, domestic dependent nation. I think was the the Worcester versus state of Georgia. My step grandfather, I think is my fourth great grandfather, was on that. Was a part of that Worcester versus state of Georgia. He was one of the citizens who were jailed or in prison in Georgia for that case, actually.
Tell us about the case. I don't think anyone listening knows about it.
So it was a really important case where the Supreme Court eventually ruled that Cherokee Nation was sovereign. Essentially, I think the word was domestic, or the phrase was domestic dependent nation. But basically, our own we have our own sovereignty, our own laws, and the state of Georgia has to respect it, which of course they didn't. But the reason that went all the way up there is because the state of Georgia made a law that if you were an American, a white man specifically living within the Cherokee Nation boundaries, it was illegal and they would arrest you under Georgia state law. And so my Cherokee grandfather had died, and my Cherokee grandmother remarried this man named Surrey Eaton, and he was a white man, American, and so it was illegal for him to live there. Of course, he's not going to leave his family and his land, and he was pretty well to do. And so he was imprisoned with Samuel Worcester, the really kind of important missionary who came down and made his home and life with the Cherokees.
Mm-hmm.
Georgia was pretty ruthless. Even like imprisoning the missionaries, it's like pretty ruthless, and it was totally bad PR at the time. My students are learning about it now. We're doing Remembering and Justice unit. It's really about Confederate monuments, but then I also throw in my own parts, and so they've been learning about this, and they're always like shocked. But I'm like, I love showing them contemporary things where it's like, no, people at the time were pretty outraged. It was pretty upsetting. It wasn't, because I think from probably just a lot of people think this way, like, oh well, it was a long time ago. People thought differently or didn't, and it's like, no, it was pretty outrageous at the time too. That shocks them a little bit to learn that.
What sort of dates are we looking at?
That's about 1830.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's about 1830 to early 30s.
One of the things about Cherokee that for people who don't follow American history or tribal history, they have such an early encounter with the colonial communities. And there's different, the more you go west, right? Like there's kind of a gap, and in the middle, maybe the French visited some of the people and whatnot. And, but then they left. But on the East Coast and in the South, there's settlers there from an early period. So unlike, Navajo Nation, which is huge, they're kind of isolated, even just geographically. Like if they have encounter with the Spanish, so be it. But they're, like, where are you going to go? Right.
Yeah.
Compared to the Cherokee, on the East Coast, or at least the South, I mean, Georgia specifically, that's such a part of the history that, I mean, most of them aren't in Georgia these days, right? Like what's...
The Cherokees who are in the Southeast or in North Carolina on a pretty, traditional reservation there in the mountains. And then the rest of, my family's in Oklahoma. Yes.
So Oklahoma and the Trail of Tears, right? Like people who, I don't assume everyone who listens or watches is an American. Like what's the Trail of Tears?
Well, the Trail of Tears is an event when really the federal government and state of Georgia eventually were able to forcibly remove the Cherokees from, our last home, which was Northwest Georgia, trekked out by foot all the way to Northeast Oklahoma. And we estimate like a quarter of Cherokees died on the way there.
Yeah.
But, it's not, Cherokees were the last to go. The other southeastern, the so-called 5 civilized tribes, which is always a name that I used to marvel over, like 5 civilized tribes. What does that mean? I remember as a kid thinking like, what?
They wear clothes.
Yeah, they went first. But yeah, most people think of the Cherokee. Yeah.
There's a lot of parallels with different communities in the Middle East, right? Like Assyrian, Armenian, different Aramaic speaking peoples, because there is a lot of forced migration and, same sort of thing in that process. Large numbers of people they died, and say something.
No, go ahead.
Okay, no,
I'm
just
trying
making
so
sure the
hard.
audio was there. Just making sure.
I
saw your lips move.
I have a tick of going, when I listen to people, and I did a TV interview once, and I realized that the microphone picked up every time I did that. Because then, in person, you wouldn't notice. So I'm trying so hard not to do that. So that's why I'm not saying anything.
No, it's all good. I like it. But, I think there's a lot of interesting parallels between Middle Eastern communities, like minority communities I'm referring to, and then the Native American communities here in the United States, in Canada, Mexico, whatever, anywhere in the New World. But our context is the United States, and have you? I don't want to shift gears too early because I want to talk about migration and where your people are. But are they pretty much split between the Southeast and Oklahoma, like your family, not just the community?
No, I mean, pretty much everybody's in Oklahoma. I noticed in terms of like migratory patterns, I noticed something really important. This affects my father a lot too. And like even I would say, I wouldn't call it the breakdown of our family, but certainly I would say like a struggle. So, once you get to Northeast Oklahoma, and Cherokees are pretty good at negotiating a very nice little part of Oklahoma, the base of the Ozark Mountains, which is the most resembles Northwest Georgia. So you could get, I haven't been there, so that's my next stop is to go back. I have a lot to do there, but I've seen a lot of pictures, and it's similar and green and pretty fertile and not a bad place to have to go be a farmer, essentially. And things were not that different than they were in Georgia. You have like your certain intertribal conflicts, and those are pretty bad, but whatever. We still have a government, we're functioning, we're sovereign, still pretty powerful. But once my great grandmother was born, she was born in 1903. That was right in the midst of the allotment system, when guess what? Oklahoma's gonna, Indian Territory is gonna be a state. So we're going to take away basically took away tribal sovereignty, we'll say, for all intents and purposes. And so really it was a breakup of the tribe and any sovereignty that we had. I think it was probably probably one of the worst times to be born, in the nation. And I can look at my great grandmother's life, and I knew her well. She only died in 2006. I can look at her life, and it's like, wow, like, so you have this sort of pride, and a lot of my family were, like judges, solicitors. They were, law. They were enforced. They were really big. They really participated in the running of the Cherokee Nation, and you don't have that anymore.
Mm.
And I think about what that must have been like psychologically, and also just for your confidence. I think that pride that you have in what you've built and established. And so she came, of age during that time. And once her parents passed away the same year, one of those things where like the wife died and the husband died right after, and she took her kids and came out to San Francisco. And that was it. So that was like how my family came to California. Cherokees had already been, had been coming out here since like the gold rush and going back.
Yeah.
And some of my uncles did that, and so we already sort of had this sort of Northern California connection. But yeah, I really do see a divide. I do see a marked difference. Like once the sovereignty is taken away, I really think it must have had a pretty crushing effect on people, and that wasn't reinstated till the late 70s. I don't know the date. And then you see that sort of built, and now Cherokee Nation is like thriving. We're doing really well. But yeah, I think that was a rough time. And I think being separated from your family, your community, which did have a lot of pride, was very close and extended, to, California was sort of a rootless place, many people from other places. So I think that had a hard effect, particularly on my family, and I think on a lot of Cherokees, and I'm sure that's true for any people who are separated from their community.
Yeah, definitely. And you say they're thriving now, and it's like, well, what would define that, right? Like, is it financial thriving? Is it cultural? Is it just
Both.
communally, like, structurally, I guess? What does it look like?
Yeah, so the nation's pretty organized. So out here, so I'm called an at-large citizen since I live outside of the nation, and we have our own political representative. Her name is Julia Coates. She's pretty formidable character. She lectured at the NEH Institute I was at last summer. I had met her before. We have meetings here. So we'll have, and I go to them whenever we have them. Some of them are political, like we have to vote on, so I still vote as an at-large citizen. Some of them are cultural, and some of them are just updates about like what's going on in the nation. And so, like one of the big efforts and a lot of funding, Cherokee's always been really good at funding. Education's always been central. Like one of the first things we build when we get to Oklahoma is the schools, the female seminary. So women were always educated alongside men. Once we started kind of acculturating.
Yeah.
Anyway, so they have, what do you call them? Immersions, not is immersion the right word? When you start school, like preschool, and it's bilingual already. So kids are learning Cherokee from the time they start school,
Amazing.
if not before. So language revitalization is so and there's so much excitement. I notice a lot of people are giving their kids traditional Cherokee names again, which, can sound really funny to an American ear, they're not all like Sequoia or something.
Right.
So that
I think that's the only name we know.
I know. His real name was George Guess.
Oh.
Or, before he got his honorific. But yeah, so I think the nation is really and we have a great chief right now too, who's really good at he comes to the meetings even in California. So he does a pretty good job of getting out and meeting all of the citizens, even the ones of us who are outside the nation. But yeah, I think culturally, financially, doing pretty good. And there's a lot of scholarships too. Cherokees are really good at funding our own scholarships for all levels of education, and it's just I think it's an exciting time.
That's awesome, especially the language.
My grandmother was born.
Well, language, of course, is one of I'm a philologist, of course, and so I'm just immersed in language. Half the classes I teach are language classes anyway, and so there's this same sort of effort, or awareness. And maybe in a lot of places, the awareness is going away. And I imagine being a citizen at large, that it's similar for a lot of people who are raised outside of Northeast Oklahoma these days. But languages from the old world, namely something like Aramaic, or for the Egyptian community, Coptic's pretty much extinct. I mean, there's always the fabled, oh, well, there's people in Upper Egypt who still speak it. Okay, where are they? I believe you. I'd love to hear kind of native Coptic. Coptic means ancient Egyptian, but in its its last form. And so there's people who still speak these languages. There's a lot of people who speak Aramaic. There's, probably, I don't know, I would guess 2 million or more Aramaic speakers in the world, but they're of different dialects. And so some of them are mutually intelligible and others require a lot more effort. So sometimes you can kind of fake it if you just change the accent, like a little bit. But then, okay, well, these people, they exist in someone else's borders, right? Like some people may exist in Turkey, it may be Syria or Iraq or Iran. And so, that kind of, where all that confluence of borders is the traditional Assyrian heartland. And so you listen to the way people speak and be like, okay, well, they're Urmijnai, people from the Urmia province of Iran. So they have like a lot of Farsi, words in their basic conversational Aramaic and things like that. And so you get used to the differences and, the Urmijnai actually have an Iranian accent kind of when they speak, plus the rhythm, and so if you can tweak it a little, then you can start receiving it better, in the ear. And, but language, how do you teach a community that's largely, living outside of the heartland? And when the heartland itself is struggling, I mean, the last 100 years after the genocide has been, extremely difficult. And then the recent, issues with, the persecution in northern Iraq and Syria and whatnot, it's really driven a lot of people out. Iraq had, just prior to, the rise of the militant groups and things, the status of what would you call it? A recognized language of the province. And so they would have their own instruction. And I guess that's kind of like, doing the bilingual education, with Cherokee Nation. And, but what do you do with people who can't grow up in Oklahoma? I mean, how many municipalities are there? Towns, cities, are there hamlets, villages? Like what does it look like, in that region of the reservation?
So I don't know. It's like, I don't know what it looks like now. I know what it used to look like before allotment. Basically counties, there are different counties. And I think some of the counties kept the same names and some shifted. But yeah, I think this is pretty Tahlequah's the capital. But yeah, I think it goes pretty far. I mean, you have everything from cities to small towns to, pretty, mountain poverty. So kind of runs a gamut. Yeah.
Yeah. So I wonder then, like, what's it like for the people you said at large? Is that what's the term again?
Yeah. So that's the actual name, citizens at large.
So a citizen at large who grows up, in NorCal or, wherever else, Texas, Georgia. How do you stay connected? If you can't be immersed, you've got the representative visiting you, but like, are there kind of pockets or there communities? Like Assyrians will live in Chicago, they'll live in Modesto or, Turlock or San Diego, New Jersey, right?
Okay. Yeah. No, we do. So here we have a Bay Area group and we have sort of a Northern and Central Valley group, which essentially we merge. And we for as long as I can remember we call them Cherokee picnics. We get together, and really it's a real picnic. You bring your own dish and there's some, there's cultural stuff, there's people selling things, there's also, then there'll be government administration things like take your picture for your ID or things like that. So there's still a community for sure. And even, and ever since I think I would say since COVID, there are so many, classes and meetings on Zoom too, for talks, crafts, things like that, like basket weaving or something. So there, I would say, I think Cherokees are pretty good at, like, picking up on what can help and doing that. But like the language is hard. I know my great grandmother, her kids didn't, I guess, I don't know. Yeah. I think they probably understood Cherokee just fine. I don't know how much they spoke it or why you necessarily would need to outside, but I think that's the hard part. I feel like when you get cut off from the language, there is a severing effect, like a severing of a limb of sorts. Hence why the language is so important. But yeah, I don't know where I was going with that. Um,
Communities getting together in the outside.
yeah. So we do a pretty good job of it. And then, I had this, the nation sent me a survey recently, as a citizen at large. And one of the questions it asked was like, would you be willing to move back to the nation or move to the nation? And, I was like, that's so interesting that they're asking that, like come back, here. And it's also doubly weird because, Oklahoma's been our home for 200 years, but then you have this other home too that's like layered back there as well. So it's like going home is such a strange concept.
Yeah, right. I was going to say Georgia, but it's the same in the Middle East. There's people who settled in all these villages in Syria along the Khabur River, and they're not from there. They're from what is today, southeast Turkey, right? And like they were moved and they
Yes.
were resettled. And, one of the English words in Aramaic is kampa, which means a camp, right? Because they were settled along these camps, and
I know the euphemisms are like, just like, yeah, removal,
yeah,
settlements are just so neutral. It's funny. That's another thing I like to teach my students about, just like the fascination of language, and they really get into it. This year, I've really put an emphasis on, etymology, and they really like, now they like, especially the honors kids who, most of them really, let's say 2/3 of them really love English and love language and stuff. And like, yeah, they're really into it. And not like I do it in any systematic way where I'm like, all right, I'm going to quiz you on these, like these roots or prefixes or something, but just the fascination of words and where they come from. And so we talk a lot about euphemisms and, what they cover up, and they love those too. Yeah. So that's an exciting thing to see, and I don't think anyone ever really like emphasize that words changed meaning or had roots here, like, so we have a lot of fun with it. And another thing with that we do just as a game is like, is it Latin, Greek, or Anglo-Saxon, just broadly. And
right.
so it's a sort of a competition, and obviously they've gotten pretty good at like, oh, that's a Greek root, that has to be a Greek word, of course, but it can trick you up sometimes. So I think as a linguist you might appreciate that. It's
Totally. And look, it gets you thinking about, how and why we use language and not just being oblivious to it, because, we're trying to convey something inside, and we use these tools to do it. And these tools, they're formed. You talk about etymology. We're largely distant from the etymology. We're unaware. We're oblivious to where most of our words come from, but they have stories and
Yeah.
they produce meaning, right? And that's that meaning. You want to be as precise as you can when you speak, but obviously, different people, they may have a different inventory of words that they know, and maybe a different experience with words too. Like I
Yeah.
recently had, the first time ever, a number of students, not just one, but there's a number of students misunderstood an English word on a test,
Uh-huh.
and like started panicking because I won't say it because they'll feel identified by it. But
Aw, yeah.
like, no, that's normal English for, I could say use,
Uh-huh.
like
Yeah,
tell me where the idea came from, like,
it's enough to throw them off. Yeah.
yeah, it was enough to throw them off and, cause a little distress. But, language is an agreement, right? It's agreement between you and me, and we've chosen to
Totally.
learn. And the more, we can engage with the etymology of things, it makes us appreciate it, I think, a little more. It makes us aware or conscious, of what we're saying and why. And,
I like how you use the word story. It's true. An individual word is like has its own story, and who doesn't like? I think we learn in stories. I
We
think that's
do.
how we remember stuff we learn, and particularly when we're young, right? And yeah, they have their own story, and they can be kind of funny stories. They can be weird stories, even creepy ones, you know. And that's a neat way to put it. I like that. I think I'll use that with my
Well,
students.
that's the limb that you talked about being severed, because when you lose the language, whether it's the syntax, the etymological connections, or the way in which words connect that maybe they don't in English. English will have certain words that connect, you know, ideologically, let's say,
Yeah.
and then other languages have their own, and that's what makes language different. And so if that's cut off and someone learns only one way and not multiple ways, right? Like I'm all for polyglottery, right? Like speak as many languages as you can. It's fun. It's exciting. Even for those of you who think it's boring, it's exciting. You don't have to be a language person to learn language. Just learn, and take your own
Yeah.
time. Who cares? Don't worry about. You don't have to be fluent overnight. Just be you, right? And appreciate that. And so, I think with communities like Native American communities, and thank God the Cherokee are larger in number and they can sustain more than some of the smaller tribes. Some tribes that are reduced to bands, and like they may have a historical tribal connection, but they're a band because the tribe kind of it isn't
Yeah.
really there anymore. As
A lot of the California tribes are like that, right?
exactly in California, they're bands, and they have a historical community and connection and region that they either were static in or they roamed, depending on the type of community organization they had. And when you lose it, it's gone. And it's one thing to learn it, but you can learn any language, but you got to think in it, right? You got to be active.
Yeah. Yeah. I get what you're saying. Yes.
Then the limb grows back, right? Then you're a salamander.
I love it. You're one of the lizards that my cat caught.
Exactly. Like just start growing back.
Yes, I know it has to be the sort of texture there that you live in. I know. I
What
know.
kind of stories, are popular or were taught to you or memorable to you, from the community?
Yeah, it's a funny mix. Like some are political stories. There's there's stories about, first of all, like Andrew Jackson's always like the devil, so you learn these sort of you learn a kind of political history of the people too. But you also, like, a lot of the stories are about, like, and it's not specific to our culture, but that I learned from my great grandmother just by her example was, like how she raised her garden and like why we raise, things that way. A kind of self-reliance. I don't know. I have to think about the specific stories. A lot of the stories like are about, I don't know how to explain it. Like a story of like we're a strong people, like very, very much like we're strong, we're here, but you know we've been wronged, not in a victim way, but in a way that's like, I don't know, almost like a Southern will rise again kind of story.
Yeah,
Like we're not done, we're not dead. Like I think there is a sense of displacement, even though again, like Cherokees again kind of all moved to the same place in California. You find us a lot in the foothills and mountains, and like my grandfather was born in Shasta. But yeah, there's just a sense of independence and I mean, this is almost sounds like libertarian, but this like really distrust of any
sure. I mean,
federal
it's
government.
natural. It's the default position of like anyone who tries to do anything to anybody else, right?
Yeah, like that. Um, so yeah, but I think always a sense of pride is certainly
Yeah,
like instilled in us. And every year we went to, my great grandmother lived in, she like when she I guess her husband retired, they settled in Clear Lake,
Okay.
and that's where we always went. So this is like 40 years on, but like this is how long she lived. You know, like she's been like like elderly for like 40 or 50 years by now, and we all like converged there. You know, like that was exciting to see like a whole family, and it was like, oh, it's her 90th birthday, it's her 100th birthday, it's her 102nd birthday, and it's nice to see your family like all gathered in that way. You know, and so I think there's just, I grew up with a real sense of pride, and
Yeah.
I don't know, you have to think about how to articulate it, but I learned it mostly from my grandfather, I would say.
Do you guys like, being in Clear Lake and stuff, do you connect with Yochadihi or any other, local
Mm-mm.
communities?
Okay, I
Is
know.
there?
Yeah, I don't know. I have to ask. I'd ask my uncle, who's now the family historian. Um, but that's like also a big loss when that grandmother died. You know, like that was a
Oh,
big
totally.
the connection. I mean, she was born and still in Indian territory, and grew up in Cherokee speaking family area, and also like I said, family that was prominent. You know, in the nation. You know, real leaders, and yeah, what I just think about that weird, how strange that must be to have your sovereignty taken away, like everything you worked for, sort of. Um, Not that people were left destitute, we always still got paid for our land or whatever property, but
Eminent domain, right?
yeah, right. I know exactly, exactly. So I think about what that must have been like, to lose that, to like be sort of like it must have been, and that was, for most of her life. There was really like only Cherokee Nation. I mean, just didn't really exist anymore. Family still exists like we still have a lot of family back there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What happened to the land like in the southeast in Georgia, North Carolina, places like that?
I don't know about the other states, but Georgia did the Georgia lottery system, where they decided to just parcel out, basically make a map of the Cherokee lands, and then do a state lottery where you could pay to be in the lottery, and whatever plot you got, that was, then the Georgia state militia would show up, and you and your family would have to leave,
Mhm.
and the lottery people would win it. So that's what happened. So they basically lotteried it out. It was great, and like it's one of the things about being a Cherokee, and I would say specifically Cherokee, but probably true for many tribes. Is like everything's documented, So I
Yeah.
even have the plat maps of my fifth great grandfather and grandmother's, their land, or maybe it's my fourth great grandfather, their land, and like exactly what was there, like where it was. I visited it last summer. Gorgeous. Now it's a park, and like what their floor was made out of, what the roof was made out of, what their outbuildings were, how many hogs they had, how many, like how big their corn patch was. I mean, it's really kind of strange details, amazing to get, but with everything was so documented, it was amazing, and then given a value on top of that. That's really weird to see. It is sort of like it's so specific, so oddly specific to know like exactly what kind of logs, made up
Yeah.
the house that the family lived in. Yeah, that was it. So got a lotteried out. Isn't that amazing? Like, oh, you just happen to get the Ridge Mansion, or something like it's crazy. And of course, that's my students and I were just learning, because they were learning it in history, and then in English we're writing about it, analyzing the language of all of this. They couldn't believe that like your land could be lotteried, but that's amazing. And
Yeah.
then to go against the Supreme Court ruling too is another level of like, what? I think about what the state of Georgia cost the country. I mean, the reason they got away with all of this against the Cherokees because people were so scared that Georgia would leave the Union.
Right.
They did anyway.
And
So
they
I
did
think
anyway.
specifically, like the state of Georgia really cost the country a lot in lives and money, and my own tribe, of course.
And unlike a lot of tribes, I mean, there's so many tribes in the United States, or even what became the United States in the North American frontier in the colonial era, and like these different nations had different alliances, and sometimes it really boiled down to, are you friends with the settlers? Like, do you have good terms with them or not? Like, because there were people who integrated. I mean, maybe I'm not talking full integration, but like, they lived as neighbors and it was a non-issue. And then there's other people or other regions where it's hostile. And so you can get like a Great Britain, trying to activate the locals against the American settlers in the Revolution, right?
Yeah.
All of a
Yes,
sudden,
that's like it's so complicated.
you get the Chickamauga Wars and whatnot. And
Oh my God, you know about that? That's wonderful.
well,
Yes.
I'm a nerd too, right? Like, so
Yeah, I love it.
I
Yeah,
just,
I know we're so. Okay, yeah, that is. Isn't that like the funniest, the weirdest story to me though? Is like how like how what was it? Was it the four Cherokee leaders, chiefs from different different parts of the tribe like go to England? Like what like this the 1740s they went something around there, like like, oh, we're just going to get on the ship and like go to London and stay with King George and be, like the toast of London high society. Like, so weird that happened. That trips me out. And my ancestor, my Scottish ancestor, was one of the, he helped facilitate that because
oh, cool.
he had been intermarried in the tribe and had been a very successful trader. So he helped facilitate that. He's like, well, I can't go back there, but you guys will probably enjoy it. So he helped and then, help them navigate what they could expect. I think what another mind game that must have been to like, go. And these are traditional Cherokees and like to go to England and like see like what do you bring back? Like wow, there's a whole
we're screwed. We're
yeah,
you know,
a whole lot of these people, and they did. It took a long time, but I think it's probably a big realization. Like we're gonna have to change our tactics here.
Well, maybe that's one of the reasons why, like, the civilized, quote unquote, epithet goes to a nation like the Cherokees because they could adapt, right? Like among all the different tribes in America, I mean, like. They owned plantations, they owned land. Like what else? Did they own slaves? Yeah. And like so they start to adapt, and then in spite of all that, to still get, parceled out in the lottery or,
and that became one of the destroy. I would even say, like that becomes like the issue about stay or go, like the Chota, you have like John Ridge, who had been educated up in Connecticut and incredibly smart, like just, like, genius smart. And, married a white woman up there, which is weird too, because, it was one thing for a Cherokee woman to marry, a white Scot or an Englishman, but because it still, it was no issues, right? Like it's like being Jewish, right? Like your mom's Cherokee, so you're going to be Cherokee. Mm-hmm. But anyway, Sid Mary, so that's when things started getting weirder. But anyway, he was so like, I think he was so shocked by the hostile treatment that he got in the Northeast, which was supposed to be this liberal, bastion of like enlightenment, like all these, Native needs is education and Jesus and everything, then they can be like us. And they realized what a lie it was, and you weren't going to get more acculturated, I guess, than John Ridge. So he was, that's why his thing was like, well, if we stay here in Georgia, then we're going to become Americans, and that really is the end of us, period, because it's really a lie that they've been selling us. So we should just go west with the people who went before us and just stay Cherokee. So then you had that fight, and then like the John Ross people are like, nope, this is our land and we don't want to go. As if anybody wanted to leave, but that's still one of the dominant stories, like that's still so like prevalent. People still really argue about this in Cherokee circles, where the treaty people, like just it's very political. It's still really divisive.
Yeah, I can imagine. It makes sense too, and it's been a theme in world history just for different people and mobility, like forced mobility. Like, who are we? Are we the land? Are we the language? Are we the recipes and the music? Like there's a bunch of people who had to leave Southeast Turkey, and even in more recent waves, starting in the 70s, who didn't want to leave, but they were the remnant. Sort of like exactly what you're describing. And, like, do we go back? And some of them have moved back to their ancestor or the village of their youth, right? Like the older generation, or the children of them who maybe they made their life in Germany, or Sweden or the United States, and now like they can go home, and because that's where they belong, right? And it's
Yeah.
is it a place? Is it a language? Is it, I mean, those are interesting
Yeah.
questions to ask, and I don't have an answer for it. I mean, I think an awareness is sufficient. Like if
Yeah.
you're aware of your history and heritage, and we're both, I don't know, I'll use the word nerd again, but we're genealogical nerds, and we know our past, and your past, your story, right? And
Yeah. Yeah.
whether it's the Scottish clans, which structurally they function a lot like Native American tribes, as well as Middle Eastern tribes, and
And Scots.
yeah, like
Left their imprint on the Cherokees for sure.
totally. So I don't know. I
I
think
know it's a hard question. It is, and and I know it's like, okay, like I love English history a lot, and I go to bed every night listening to, like, I listened to it several times now, Churchill's like History of the English Speaking People.
cool.
Yeah, just like I love, like, because it's like the cadence of Churchill when you're trying to like just chill out. But it's like, who are the English? Like, even answering that question is so hard, and it's not really very clear to me. Like, I sort of
Right.
picked up with Julius Caesar and Boadicea, and but like it's still like, what was the language? Like it's really they're it's a little bit cloudy.
Seriously, and people go back to the whole hyphenated Anglo-Saxon, forgetting that the Southern Saxons, say, I mean, south on the island at least, like they're cousins of the Anglic, peoples, the people, in Mercia and Anglia, and like, yeah, we get the name from Anglia, but all these other people are Saxons, and they're neighbors from the north, what would you call it, the coastal invaders, and tribal neighbors, and so they speak a little different. It's the same but different, maybe it's like the US and Australia, or Britain or Scotland, the way they speak English, I mean, cousins, and then it becomes something at some point.
Yeah, it takes on its own identity, its own factors or something.
Yeah.
I love it. I wonder at what point you realize like you're a nerd. I was like, I wonder.
If you're interesting, number one, if you're interesting, you're a nerd.
Curious. Yeah.
Like that's enough. I think. What else? That's probably the dividing line. Like if you're interested in things that aren't, in the old days it was MTV. If it's not Instagram and whatever kids
TikTok.
are doing?
Oh God, they're on
TikTok. Like that's not okay. After 10 minutes, that whole fad is done. It's gone.
Yes. Yes. Outside
read a book, like read different books from different periods and different places. And
the weird thing, I'm sure it as a teacher, like you can your readers like right away, when you're a student, oh, you're a reader, like your niece. No question. You know this from from when they talk to you, and the first thing they write for you, like you just is something I can't even quite put my finger on it. Yeah, they write well, or speak well, but it's more than that. There's just something extra there.
Right. I mean, they're formed, right? Like they're shaped, and so they, you get to see their shape when they express themselves, and every little thing forms us. Even the stuff that's not forming us is forming us. It's forming an emptiness sometimes, or it's forming can you form a void? I think you can form a void, because the void takes the shape of the form, right? So you can form a void. It's been a discussion lately on,
really,
form and formlessness and nothing. But if you're talking about the thing making the shape, then you can describe the void in terms of the boundary of the shape.
Yeah, the boundary.
Whatever. This is interesting.
Words.
And if you're interested, you're a nerd too. So welcome to the club. If it's not been made aware yet.
I think the curiosity, just something like, oh, I'll check that out a little bit or something.
Yeah, for real.
I had some VHS home video I was watching some years ago, and I was about 8, and I had an obsession with Helen Keller. So I stood in front of like the Christmas tree, like lecturing my family on Helen Keller, her life and works, and I was like, wow. I remember being obnoxious, but like I was already a little scholar, I didn't know it yet. Like I was a little budding scholar already.
That's awesome.
Yeah. I mean, really dorky looking 8-year-old too, like little chubby
okay.
bangs.
Bangs, yeah. That was
like when your parents cut them, their head.
Oh, sure, I know. When it comes to just taking us back, the communities thriving or surviving, they're every different nation is in a different place, and what are some of the things you think are important to get to that level, to thrive, for heritage preservation? I think I like heritage preservation more than cultural, because cultural seems, as big as it is, it's still kind of limited, right? Like, you live a heritage, yes, and a big part of that is cultural, but maybe some of it is financial and just being stable, and others it's, a lot of communities have substance abuse issues and things that came in along the way. Like what do you think, is good for thriving? Like what kind of roadmap would you suggest?
Oh, let me get on my throne here. I really think a sense of, I know sound vague, but I feel like a sense of pride in who you are as a people. Like, there's a sense of like a value there built in, because a lot of people have shame about, who they are. And we've seen that throughout history, in different communities well, that's another topic, but I think having a sense of like, pride or at least maybe a story about, why you're special or something, like what's valuable about you. I think those stories are important, and those you don't even have to tell them. They're just sort of picked up on, with each generation. I think language is important, but language can also be brought back, not like from the dead necessarily, but like, we're gonna, like, Cherokee's not in danger of disappearing or something,
right?
And also probably a sense of, I think financial is part of it. Like it's easy, it's like how people with money can act like money's not that important, but when you don't have it, it's, there are a lot of problems that come along with that.
Absolutely. Poverty's expensive.
It really is.
Everything costs more.
To be poor. Yes. It really does cost to be poor. You learn that when you're
you
poor.
Learn it when you're poor. Exactly.
Yes. I finally had a little more money, I wouldn't run into these costly problems. I think those are important. Like I was saying earlier, like the connection to my own family, like in those years that we don't have a nation, we don't really have any sovereignty, like that was crushing. And I can see, like, since, we have we have our own sovereignty again, to certain degrees, there's a pride in that, there's a confidence, and it's taken a while to work out. There's definitely been issues politically, with the leadership and in fighting, but I think like we're at a place, the Cherokee Nation is, where, like we're not like we're working and functioning, and education, at least I can extrapolate from my own people, I guess. Maybe that's all I can do is start with the particular, but education is really important and always has been for Cherokees in different ways, as we've grown as a people or as a nation. Those things I think, like are important. Stories I think are probably absolutely central, because there's so much you can uncover from your own stories.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. A little, the folklore, and having our own myths that we can lean on and use to form an identity.
We're lucky that we had the syllabary, pretty early on, or an important time anyway. So we could start to write things down. One of the cool things is in Georgia, we went to what had been the capital, New Echota, and they sort of rebuilt the printing press there, the Cherokee Phoenix. That was
Wow.
the first. I don't know if it was the first bilingual newspaper in the nation, but it was certainly the first American Indian paper, and it was really cool. We, like it's not the original printing press we had because I think the state of Georgia made sure that disappeared pretty early, but they sort of rebuilt it. And it's like fascinating to see. So we got to like roll it out with the, what do you call them? The little, the letters. What do you call that? But anyway, it was really fun, like to roll it out. And I have some copies. I keep them up in my classroom, so the kids see a lot of the Cherokee syllabary
Yeah.
in little places. You know how like you have little windows in the school classroom, in the
Yeah.
doors. So like I just fill that in with the newspapers, and they get, eventually they're like, "What is that?" Like what are these words? And they see them all around the room, and and then there's a emeritus professor from UC Davis named Martha. What is her married last name? Her maiden name, I think, was Martha Hicks. Let me think about it. Martha Cox, I think. Martha Cox, yes. And so she's fascinating too, probably right up your alley. I think her scholarship was like Mayan languages and things like that, like Central American. But anyway, she's a distant, not even that distant, but a cousin of mine. She was born in Oklahoma, in Cherokee Nation, and she's an older lady, but she's really funny. So she's involved in a bunch of different Cherokee language classes. She has like one that's just like people from around the country who are, citizens who like want to learn, they practice, and she has her language group that's just like other linguists,
Yeah.
professors. But she told me one of the things she loves to do is take $20 bills and write Cherokee syllabary characters and words over Andrew Jackson. So if you ever see a 20 with Cherokee characters, it's Martha. And I tell my students that, and they think that is so funny, like so rebellious.
Yeah. I don't want to use the word revival when it comes to revival, or because it is a type of revival, right?
Yeah, yeah, I like that
Anyone
word.
anyone who's been in a difficult situation has to reemerge. It's a revival of sorts. But
Yeah.
what's the role of people who aren't part of the nation, in support of revival, and who care about, where people come from, and, what it takes to bring their story to life, right? Like, what
Yeah.
sort of advice or recommendations? I don't know how many Cherokee people are going to be listening to the podcast, so, but there's definitely
Yeah.
other communities who listen who could think, could model themselves, or their experience on different communities like the Cherokee Nation. And, there's just people who are outside of that entirely, right? And
Yeah. First of all, if you don't mind, I'll post it on my Cherokee groups.
oh, that'd be awesome.
We're pretty good. Like, yeah, there's, like I said, really, even here locally in California, like a lot of groups that meet and do things together. Waiting for, like, I think in April, the chief's coming again. I always love when the chief comes. I get like excited. It's like, oh, the chief is here. But anyway, I'll post it so other people can see it, and yeah, that'll be interesting. Cherokees are pretty opinionated and like to weigh in. So
That'd be
so,
great.
yeah,
Like, share, subscribe, and comment below with your
yeah.
opinionated opinions.
Please email Mike Wingard with your.
You got it.
Just kidding. I don't know how to answer that. That's a what's a would extrapolate from that is like you have to have an effort. Like you can do it, but you have to have that sort of purpose of like why you're like there has to be an intergenerational, I think, sort of connection and teaching. Otherwise, things just disappear, right? I
Yeah.
think Cherokees are doing that, and I love that. I love that the schools are like the kids are learning child.
Oh, that's amazing. What about like different nations, working together, that, like you said, Blackfoot are in one totally different region than the Cherokee or the Navajo. And, these are the big players, right? Compared to like the California tribes, they're very small, many of them. And, the geography is not as mobile as, say, like the plains, right, where you have actual nomadic community and things like that. And
yes,
what sort of cooperation exists, and is it good? Think about even Scottish revival, right? And like because similar things happened, with if you're an American and you're either lowlander or highlander, right? And you have a story with each of those, and there's different things that forced lowlanders, out of the lowlands and into the Ulster, and then off to America and into Appalachia, and Appalachia, and just
Yes.
and they have their own clans and stories and cultures that that go back to a time that we've forgotten on that end. And I always think support in just the sense of awareness. Like people don't need to do anything apart from get out of the way and just be nice. That's kind of like my general thing. Just be nice to each other and let people do whatever, and that's a good way of being in this world where we all live together.
Is. And so underestimated. Yes.
Right. And then, but I think it, knowing more about the nations here in the United States, and should hopefully make people more aware of their own history, because as great as it is to be an American and have one American identity, where does it come from? And what went into that story to make it what it is? And different people have different, streams, that flow into the one river. And so anyways.
No, I like that. My students are like covering right now, that's like the big 8th grade question that they keep coming back to in their history and English class is American identity and what makes it up. And it's a big one. It's one of the I don't know, I guess I'm biased because I'm a reader and an English teacher, but so much it goes back to, we're talking about etymology, just stories, like the stories that we're told, the stories that we retell. There's so much in those, even if they're ritualized stories, or if they're just stories that your dad told you growing up. There's so much contained in there that's not even like, I feel like when I look back on my life, I think like, man, my dad is such an amazing storyteller, and every story he told me about different parts of our family, they're always contain the sense of like pride and strength, and like you're from strong people, and people who just strong people. And it wasn't like he ever said that word, but like he did. He got older, but like there are these things that make you proud of who you are.
I love it. I love it. Well, I could probably talk to you for another couple hours.
You got me for almost an hour and a half, almost. Not bad.
Almost. We'll see.
Hey, you're so funny. Thanks for texting me at 9:30. I kept hitting snooze. I'm so bad. I'm like a teenager. What is wrong with me?
I don't know. I want to say what's wrong with you, but I don't want to cross the boundary.
No, it's like even as a little elementary school kid, I'd be like, I hate waking up.
Well, that's okay. Like I said, if I get back into town, I'll be your life coach. And
please come back. Come back.
I'm working on it. It is for real. Well, listen, thanks again. Thanks for the conversation. And we'll probably have a follow-up to the conversation, because I've started the Center for historical cultures and Indigenous studies, for heritage preservation. And as part of the center's activities, we're going to include a lot of different communities, and nations and languages and customs, and just really sort of I'll say celebrating, but celebrating revival.
I love that idea. I love what you're doing, that it's not just like, well, here's the local tribes where we live, so that here's our center, which is really what it mostly is. And having this this sort of academic I think revival is a good word. I do.
Awesome.
I like that word.
Well, thanks again. I'll let you get going, and we'll talk soon.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I got over my nervousness. My first podcast.
Forget about it.
And I'll do it again. No, I dreamed about it last night. I was nervous, but
no, you're not. Get out of here.
I was like,
out of town.
A long time, and I had a dream about it. I did. Yeah.
All right. Well, that's a first. Dreaming about the podcast. Yes. Well, when I talk about my mildly successful, I say mildly, right? It's my mildly successful podcast. Yeah, people dream about it. It's all good.
I have students who listen. Yeah, your dad's very popular. I'm like, and then they listen. So you do have listeners. I'll tell you about them later.
All right. Cool.
All right. Bye. Have a good day.
You too. Take care.